What's up, guys? My name is Ace, and it's finally time to share the results of the skill-based matchmaking study that myself, Drifter, JGOD, and S0ur have been working on for the past, 3 weeks now, 2.5 weeks. We've been really putting a lot of time into this, and we want to make sure we do it right. And the goal with this is to just try to gain a bit of a better understanding of how the skill-based matchmaking system works, based on the limited public data we have access to. And also keep in mind, all of this had to be hand-calculated, hand-tested, and all the data entry was done by hand. I think I put about 70 hours into this myself, and then the other guys put a bunch of time into it as well. So we did a lot here to get a decent sample size. Of course, it could be better, but we did put a ton of time and effort into this, and I feel like it does show us some pretty good trends when it comes to skill-based matchmaking. So to start it off, I'm going to go through the testing process and methodology we used. I know for a lot of people that's kind of boring. I'll try to remember to put timestamps here so you can skip ahead if you don't want to see this, but I do feel it is very important to present this. Essentially, each of us took multiple accounts. I tested 3 different accounts of different skill levels. Drifter did 3 as well, JGOD did 2, and S0ur did 1. But with these, we tested 9 accounts with a wide variety of skill levels, from significantly below average all the way up to an actual pro player's account. And we collected data over 10 games on all of the players that were in our lobbies. Now keep in mind there's a bit of a limitation here, and that is sometimes we simply couldn't find data on players. So you will see some blank spots in the data, which again, that will of course be in the description down below. But we collected data on as many of the players as we possibly could in those lobbies to try and find out what sort of trends exist with matchmaking as well as team balancing. We did decide to include that this year as well, because that's quite an important factor that we'll get into. But we collected things like kill-death ratio, win-loss ratio, score per minute, accuracy, the platform that the player was playing on, which, keep in mind, we did do all of this testing with crossplay enabled, with the exception of Drifter's first 5 games he did with crossplay disabled. But yeah, we collected a ton of data on these people. For me, at least, I stuck to domination only for this entire test, and all of the score per minute values that I collected were for domination specifically, because game modes can significantly impact your global score per minute. So that's why I chose a game mode specific score per minute for the game mode that I was testing. Additionally, with this, we recorded how long it took to matchmake into a lobby, as well as the ping value that we got in each one of these matches. And with that, I think that lays out the basics of what we did and how we did it. In the sheet with the data, there's a better list of our methodology and everything. But let's start hopping into the data. When we compare the kill-death ratios, which keep in mind this is actual kill-death ratio, it doesn't include assists, which the elimination death ratio does. This is the true kill-death ratio. But we had that for each of the accounts, as well as the average of all of the players that they ran into in these 10 games. And taking a look at our graph here, there is definitely a very clear trend with this. We get an R-squared value of 0.68, which is relatively strong. It's not super strong, but it is definitely a trend here. Essentially, the higher your kill-death ratio, the more likely you are to run into people that also have a higher kill-death ratio. But I do want to be crystal clear here, it's not a perfect one-to-one sort of thing. So if you have a 1.5 kill-death ratio, for instance, that doesn't mean that every single person in your lobby has a 1.5 KD. You might run into somebody with a 3 KD, and you might run into somebody with a 0.8 KD. There is still some variance there, but what we're looking at is the averages, and on average, there is a correlation between your kill-death ratio and the kill-death ratio of the people that you're playing with. We also saw a somewhat similar trend with score per minute, although score per minute's a little bit weird in this game. I'm not too sure how the matchmaking system calculates the score per minute, like if they use the actual displayed values or not, but I have a feeling they don't, because those displayed values are heavily influenced by the types of streaks that you're going on. As you go on higher streaks, your score per minute will go up exponentially, and therefore it does skew this data a fair amount in this game compared to previous Call of Duty games. But in general, there was still a trend that we noticed here as well. Now, looking back to last year's study with Modern Warfare, one of the big conclusions we found was it was mainly our recent performance that mattered rather than our career performance. So if you had a string of really good games against lower skilled lobbies, then the data we collected last year indicated that it would bump you into harder lobbies against more difficult players. And I'm sure this is no surprise to anybody that's played a lot of Cold War. It appears they have basically the exact same system this time around. I honestly think they pretty much just copied and pasted the skill-based matchmaking system from Modern Warfare into Black Ops Cold War. We see very similar trends, very similar values. I don't believe it's any stronger or weaker in Black Ops Cold War based on the data that we've seen, but it does appear to be relatively strict when it comes to your recent performance. So if you're playing really well, it's going to put you on harder matches. If you have a string of really bad games where you're performing really terrible, then it will bump you down to easier players. Now, we don't know exactly at this point if your recent performance is the past 3 games or 5 games or 10 games, We just know that there is a correlation between your recent performance and the types of players that you'll end up playing against. So overall, there's not a whole lot to say about this aside from the fact that it appears to be pretty much the same as Modern Warfare. However, this time around, we ran into some very interesting results across the board that we didn't run into last year. Last year with Modern Warfare's test, Drifter and I didn't find any correlation at all between your skill level and the ping that you get in-game, or your connection quality. This time around, all of us that tested multiple accounts noticed the exact same trend. And this is, for the higher skilled accounts that we were testing, on average, they had a higher ping than the lower skilled accounts. And with this one, I do want to be super clear here so nobody misquotes me. The sample sizes we're dealing with for this are extremely small, and therefore more testing is required to say this with absolute confidence. At this point, it's just a little trend that we noticed that may be indicating that ping is no longer king, and being a higher skilled player may result in a worse connection than if you were a lower skilled player. So JGOD saw this trend, Drifter saw this trend, and me especially, I saw this trend more than anybody. And I think this is likely due to my region. I live near Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm pretty far away from the servers I tend to connect to. I actually often connect to a Kansas server based on my NetDuma router, which, by the way, I should mention the router wasn't doing any filtering during our testing. It was just monitoring, not filtering. But I'm just going to lay out what I ran into. For me, the best connection that I will typically get in Black Ops Cold War is going to be somewhere around 45 to 50 milliseconds. It really doesn't get any better than that for me, and that's fine. That's a very reasonable connection experience. However, I often notice, especially on my main account, I will end up in lobbies with about 100 millisecond ping. Not all the time, it just happens from time to time. But when I was doing this testing, I found that I was running into those 100 ping lobbies far more on my main account than my low skill account and my average account that I was testing. And it turns out, after 10 games on each of these accounts, my average ping on my main account was 50% higher than the others. And this is something that is extremely concerning. Now, I am going to be revisiting this in the future with a much larger sample size where I'm just going to be focusing on the ping and the matchmaking times. But so far, based on these limited tests, my matchmaking times were significantly longer on my main account, so it takes way longer to find a match, and I had a higher chance of getting a worse ping. And that's not to say that I didn't have my really good 45 to 50 millisecond ping on my main account sometimes, because I did. It just seems much more likely that it will expand that search result based on your skill level, which could give you a higher ping value. So if this is true, I don't think this is something that's done maliciously where they are trying to add ping to skilled players. I think it's more so you're just drawing from a smaller pool of players that are relatively skill matched with that player, and therefore the system is willing to expand that search to a higher ping lobby in order to get a better skill match. And this is not supposed to be happening. The claim from Vonderhaar has always been that ping is king, and therefore your connection quality will never be sacrificed for the sake of skill-based matchmaking. And it looks like that might not be true this time around. Now, this is where I want to get into the next section that I found very interesting, and this is team balancing. Now, team balancing is separate from matchmaking. Matchmaking is the system that puts a lobby of players together. Team balancing is what happens after that lobby is already together. And this is often confused. I see people often tweeting me like screenshots where they did really well, all of the players on their team really suck, and all of the players on the other team did quite well. And then they say this is because of skill-based matchmaking. No, that's not skill-based matchmaking, that's team balancing, and that is an important distinction to be making. But what I personally noticed with my data when comparing my teammates versus my enemies with the various accounts that I tested is with my below average and my average account, the stats for my teammates and enemies were nearly identical. The teams were balanced out really nicely when I wasn't factored into the equation. However, on my main account, if I eliminated myself from the equation and I just looked at my teammates versus my enemies, on average, my enemies were better in every single category of the stats that we collected, by a noticeable margin. It wasn't a small margin by any means. So what appears to be happening here is since they can't find properly skill-matched players for my account, because I'm not trying to brag here, but throughout these 10 games, there were only a few players that were actually at my level of stats. And therefore, even though I'm going to be playing more skilled players on average, they're still not generally going to be quite at my level. The team balancing system has to compensate for this discrepancy in stats, and since it is such a large discrepancy on average, it has to give me some of the worst players in the lobby on my team, and then the better players have to be on the other team. So what this means is if you're a skilled player and you have exceptional stats, like we're not talking about slightly above average. I mean, if you have the type of stats where in most lobbies, nobody's going to have a similar set of stats to you, you are going to be expected to carry very hard in order to have a shot at winning the game due to this team balancing algorithm. And this goes along with my anecdotal experience as well. From the beginning of Cold War, I've always felt that if I'm not giving it 100%, my team basically has no shot at winning, and most likely they're going to get completely stomped into the ground. Whereas when I was doing the testing with my bot account, I would be ignoring the objective completely, I'd be dying more than I'd be killing, and yet, surprisingly, it seemed like whatever I did didn't really matter to the outcome of the game. I was still winning games, I was still losing games, and my involvement in that game seemed to have very little impact on the outcome. So I did find this data to be very interesting. I knew there was a team balancing algorithm, but I didn't realize just how strict it would be and just how much better my enemies are on average compared to my teammates. And with that, that pretty much covers it for the interesting results we found throughout this study. I know I didn't dive into extreme detail with this. I mainly just want to get across the main points that we found throughout our study. If you guys want to look at the details, you can just check out the data for yourselves. But now at the end of the video here, I did want to talk about a bunch of misconceptions with the skill-based matchmaking system on both sides of it. I feel like people exaggerate on both sides, and I was finding myself often misquoted from the skill-based matchmaking studies from last year as well. So one of the big misconceptions with the skill-based matchmaking system is it doesn't find 11 other clones of you to put you in a lobby together. Above average players will still run into below average players. Below average players will sometimes still run into a professional player. It's not so strict that it limits you to a very fine range of players that you can matchmake with. Instead, what we're looking at here is averages. It's all about the averages. And on average, a higher skilled player is going to be playing above average players. And on average, a low skilled player is going to be playing lower skilled players. It doesn't mean there's never going to be a crossover here. Additionally, players that are well above average, like we're talking top 5% or so, they're actually rarely going to be running into players that are the same skill level as them. Most of the players they run into will still be a lower skill level than them. Next, a common misconception on the other side of things, and this is due to how it's labeled, skill-based matchmaking, is this really isn't a true skill-based matchmaking system. A true skill-based matchmaking system would give you an ELO score, and it would matchmake based on that ELO score. And generally, an ELO rank won't be significantly swinging from game to game like it can in Cold War. So since this is so heavily based on your recent performance rather than your actual skill level, this really technically isn't skill-based matchmaking. It's the most commonly accepted term and the most commonly searched for term, so that's why we use it in our titles and we refer to it as skill-based matchmaking. But in reality, this is more of an engagement-optimized or retention-based matchmaking system. It's not designed just to be fair to players to make sure they're playing with people of the similar skill level. What it's designed to do is keep you playing for as long as possible. So it gives you the highs, it gives you the lows, and it does this in a very cyclical manner for many of the players in the community, depending on where you fall as far as your skill goes. With a true skill-based matchmaking system, you wouldn't see these massive swings from lobby to lobby. You would see progression in the difficulty over time. And that's not what this system appears to be based on the data. So to wrap this up, I'm not going to dive into deep detail about my thoughts on skill-based matchmaking because I have completely beaten this topic to death over the past couple years. I am really not a fan of strict skill-based matchmaking in Call of Duty public matches without any sort of visible skill rank attached to it. There's no reward or incentive for getting good at the game. And essentially, the more skilled you get, the harder the game is going to get behind the scenes, again, with nothing for you to show for it. And it appears, based on our data here, your ping also may be getting worse as you get more skilled at the game. So I am firmly against this strict skill-based matchmaking system that's hidden in the background for Call of Duty public matches. And this is where I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the current state of skill-based matchmaking in Black Ops Cold War? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you kind of indifferent? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time. I'm going to have to actually stretch this round out a little bit. All right, you can kill me. Classic.